All right. Hi, everyone. This is Mr. P here, coming to you with lesson 9 on the Montgomery bus boycott. And before before maybe watching this video, I'd recommend reading the narrative here on the Global Nonviolent Action Database and watching the episode from Eyes on the Prize linked here. If you have these slides open separately, you should be able to open these links and fill out that row in the analysis of nonviolent struggle during the civil rights campaign movement. So this video will serve to kind of summarize and analyze and contextualize this particular campaign, which is seen as kind of the first major campaign within the civil rights movement. Again, not the first kind of campaign within the larger 20th century Black freedom struggle we studied, Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porter, Southern Tenant Farmers Union, but in terms of the kind of specific nonviolent struggle of the civil rights movement, traditionally speaking, in the 50s and 60s, this really kicks it off. So here we go with the Montgomery bus boycott. All right. So first, whenever we study these campaigns, I want to first lay out the conditions of oppression. There's a first element in analyzing nonviolent campaigns. So in Montgomery, in Alabama, there were Jim Crow segregation laws, not just on the buses, schools, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, right? Even more than that. That's just a short list. And there were laws that required Black folks to sit in the back, white folks could sit in the front, and Black folks, no matter where they were seated, would have to yield their seats in the middle or back to whites if no others were available. I want to recognize the long tradition of protesting public transit, much of which we've already discussed. You might remember Octavius Cato's desegregation of the trolley car here in Philadelphia in 1867. Ida B. Wells, biting that hand of a man it was train in Tennessee. I believe she was traveling from Memphis, where she refused to get up, and she bit the man's hand, and it won the first round of her lawsuit. Anyhow, Ida B. Wells, Octavius Cato, Claudette Colvin. There's a lot of people, in particular Black women, who protest public transit segregation, and Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott was not the first time. When we studied this boycott, we want to understand leaders and organizations. So Joanne Robinson is probably the most important early leader here. She is a professor at Alabama State College, HBCU. She's the president of the Women's Political Council, which was a group of 300 formally educated. When I say educated, I'm talking about formally educated, kind of college-educated Black women who implemented a series of voter registration drives, bus desegregation campaign, a campaign to employ Black policemen to try and diversify the police force before the boycott, before the Montgomery bus boycott. So there was work on the ground being done by local leaders before Dr. King even arrived. Rosa Parks is the next, important leader we want to talk about. I have some information here about who she was prior to, refusing to get up off the seat on the bus. She was a secretary to E.D. Nixon, who was a porter of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Cars. She's, someone who managed to get, successfully registered to vote after several attempts. She was a trained organizer. She ran the NAACP Youth Council. She worked for the NAACP to investigate rape cases for Black women, because local police forces would often not investigate those cases. You can read more about one of those cases here. And she refuses to get up, right, off the seat of the bus and is arrested. And she says, right, people always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. There's lots of children's books that say that. But that isn't true, right? She says, I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. So, Rosa Parks knew what she was doing. She was a trained organizer. This wasn't some, old woman who was just tired or feeling tired. No, that's a kind of a myth that gets told by, several children's books and whatnot. Before Rosa Parks, in Montgomery, Alabama, there was a 15-year-old girl who was pregnant and who was also darker skinned than Rosa Parks was. And her name was Claudette Colvin, and she was arrested for refusing to get up off the seat for a white person, according to the law. So she violated that law and was arrested. And Claudette Colvin was not the one to kind of spark the boycott. Why? Well, clergy leaders were worried that Claudette Colvin would not have the same appeal to the broader Black community and the white community as well. In that, she could be kind of villainized as, being pregnant before marriage, that sort of thing. Being a teenage kind of expecting mother. And so she is not the one, although she is on the court case that led to the Supreme Court desegregating the buses. So she does continue to fight beyond her refusal and arrest. But she's not the one that is used as to launch the boycott. Rosa Parks is the one whose arrest launches a one-day boycott, which becomes a 381-day boycott. Rosa Parks talks about how she had, Emmett Till in her mind when she refused to give up her seat as well, thinking back to a recent incident when, at the time, a recent incident when a boy who had, during the Great Migration or the Great Flee from Terror, moved to Chicago, was back down south, and was attacked and killed, essentially lynched, where a white by boyfriend and I think brother of this woman who said he whistled at her. She later says in recent years that he did not, that she essentially lied. And so the case was kind of reopened because the men who killed him, they were acquitted. And after they were acquitted, they admitted to doing the killing. But due to double jeopardy laws, they couldn't be retried because they were already found innocent. All right. So moving on from that, back to the bus boycott. That was a little background. Back to the bus boycott. The clergy develop a new organization, the Montgomery Improvement Association, to run the boycott because the local churches had voted to extend the boycott. So this is now the organization that's going to drive the boycott. And Dr. King is brought in to be president of this association. He's a new, young, 26-year-old, few years younger than me, which is wild to kind of imagine, him that young, new minister in town to lead this movement. And you can listen to some of his speeches at some of these mass meetings. I want to kind of move forward a little bit to the demands piece here, where the boycott initially demanded the following: courteous treatment of Black passengers, seating on a first-come, first-served basis with whites filling the bus from the front and Blacks from the back, and the employment of some Black drivers. They were not demanding full desegregation, right? This should surprise us when we look at the initial demands, that whites would still sit from the front and Blacks from the back. But they wouldn't have to yield if there weren't enough seats. It was initially a very restrained demand. Only later, during the demand, did the goals shift to ending segregation on the buses altogether, because Montgomery refused to implement these demands. So they use a variety of methods. Boycott the buses. 70% of the bus riders were Black. So this is going to hurt economically, the bus companies. They use protest meetings, public speeches, like the one you saw King giving, and they use alternative transportation systems like a rideshare program. These are all methods used to sustain the boycott. There's violence in response. The mayor and the city commissioners joined white citizens councils. There's a harassment campaign. King and Nixon's homes were bombed. There's mass arrests. The carpool cars, their insurance was canceled on them, like local U.S. insurance was canceled. So they had to buy insurance from a London firm who took up the insurance. I actually think they took it up on very little pay or no pay at all. I can't remember. I would have to look back into that. The KKK ends up parading around the Black neighborhoods once, what you can see here, once the Supreme Court, under pressure from the boycott, decides to order the desegregation of Montgomery buses. After desegregation, there's more repression, more bombing of Black churches and Reverend Abernathy and Reverend Gratz's homes. But the boycott achieved success. And it's important to note that these mass arrests actually led to more people joining the boycott. This is known as the paradox of repression. I want to kind of come back to this, right? Some of the success is in part achieved because of the repression the movement faced, led to more people joining. So they achieve success. They get a Supreme Court ordered desegregation of the bus system under Browder. It was other people, Gail, woman's last name was Gail. Claudette Colvin was on this case. There are about 5 Black women on this case who were arrested for not giving up their seats, and they bring the case all the way to the Supreme Court. Rosa Parks actually was not on the Supreme Court case, named in the Supreme Court case, or wasn't, I guess it would be plaintiff in the case. Anyhow, so it's a combination of the boycott and the court system, with the NAACP running the court, running the resistance through the courts, and the Montgomery Movement Association running the resistance on the ground with the boycott. Combination of the two yield victory. Shows that they can sustain a mass movement for over a year. Importance of local economic action. Set a precedent. Other southern cities desegregated their buses up to 20. King is launched as a leader 2 years after, about a year after this campaign. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference forms as kind of mostly a collection of a lot of the Black clergy around the country to sustain mass demonstrations to try and end Jim Crow. This is where they begin to really feel they can kind of take Jim Crow and destroy it. And while not the goal, there are a lot of institutions and public accommodations that remain segregated in Montgomery. This did not end segregation entirely. It ended bus segregation in particular. And I'll just end with this quote from Bayard Rustin: "When an individual is protesting society's refusal to acknowledge his dignity as a human being, his very act of protest confers dignity on him." So just think about that, right? That when society refuses to acknowledge and pursue the dignity of human individuals, protests can actually regain that sense of dignity, and I find that to be really powerful. So that'll end our Montgomery bus boycott video. Hope you learned some new information. Check out for more detail the Eyes on the Prize and the Global Nonviolent Action Database piece. Join us for the next video on the sit-ins and freedom rides. All right, take care.